uh, expounding on this brochure here that I got through the 700 Club. You can get these free, but they wouldn't give me more than one. So if you just call that number 800-700-7000 and ask for Islam, Religion of Peace or War. That's the name of this brochure. I got this several years ago, and then a couple of years ago I tried to get more copies. They wouldn't send it to me, but any more copies. But it is free. And I suggest that if you haven't already written this number down, that you please write it down and order you one of these, because this is a very enlightening brochure. It is very well written, and I hope that it will bring you to the realization of what Islam really is. Okay, I want to start out by telling you how this booklet was collected by native Arabic speakers and Muslim background believers who studied Islam and have been working in the fields of communications and comparative religion for many years. For their research, they relied on authentic Arabic, Hadith, and Sunnah, and utilized the Arabic version of the Quran that is currently used in Egypt and Saudi Arabia. To present their findings in English, they used the Palmer English translation of the Quran that is considered to be one of the oldest English translations in the world and is currently used by many worldwide. Okay, I told you you may not be able to read this, so you'll have to bear with me. The first part of this book is devoted to, I would just call it 9/11/2001. How many of you remember the day 9/11/2001? Do you remember where you were at that day? I do, and it's ingrained in my mind. I'll never forget seeing that second plane hit one of the towers. We weren't aware of the first one, but we did see the second one because I was in a training meeting for a company. That day, there were 4 airliners that were hijacked by Muslim terrorists from Arabia. 2 of them hit the Twin Towers, and 1 hit the Trade Center. And the fourth one that was hijacked, actually, I think, crashed in Pennsylvania. So Joe has talked about total commitment. Those guys that hijacked those planes knew what they were going to do. They basically committed suicide for Allah. That day forever changed security in the United States. How many of you got to travel on airlines before 9/11? Okay. It was a lot different traveling back then than it is now, right? We didn't have security checkpoints or anything before 9/11. 9/11 forever changed the United States. First of all, 2,000 977 innocent lives were lost that day. Probably the worst loss in one day that the United States has ever seen. Probably worse than Pearl Harbor. And those were innocent people in those towers. The question is Islam religion of peace or war? The day that the planes were hijacked, I had friends that were in other states. They had to make other arrangements to get home because all the flights were canceled that day. If they were in the state of Washington, they had to find land transportation to get home. These people are serious. To try to understand the Muslim or Islam religion, okay? Islam is the religion, Muslim is what their equivalent of, we're called Christians, they're called Muslims, okay? Whether they're a religion of peace or war, I hope we can define that before this class is over. Can y'all hear me okay over there? Okay. Uncharacteristically, George W. Bush, 6 days after 9/11, made this statement: Islam was a religion of peace. Needless to say, I was disappointed when I heard him say that. Okay, so we need to find out who Muhammad was and who this religion is based upon. Muhammad was born around AD 570 in the town of Mecca in the Arabian Peninsula, where Saudi Arabia is located today. By the way, those 4 guys that committed suicide were from Saudi Arabia. The boy Muhammad entered into frequent trances, which one of his nurses attributed to demon possession. We should note that Muhammad's mother gave him away to a nurse to raise him for the first 3 or 4 years after he was born. He suffered repeated tragedies, and his mother, father, and grandfather died, leaving him to be raised by his uncle. Now, Muhammad, this is not a clear statement, but he's the equivalent of a prophet. And this is the guy that Islam is based upon. It's believed that Muhammad did not receive any formal education, and he was illiterate, unable to read or write. And this is a prophet? This is who people wind up following. He was illiterate. A wealthy widow named Khadijah, I don't know how you pronounce that, who was 15 years his senior, arranged for Muhammad to marry her. He worked as his wife's employee, traveling throughout the Arabian region. In his position as the business manager, he encountered many Jews and Christians and learned of their religions and culture. Even by the age of 40, Muhammad was still experiencing trances. It was during this time he claimed the most powerful revelation. In it, he asserted that a being grasped him so tightly that he thought he would die. Then the being gave him a forceful message, which experience Muhammad attributed to jinn, and I couldn't find out exactly what jinn was, but it's some kind of a mental disease, I think. Subsequently, Muhammad shared the experience he had with his wife, and later her cousin. Her name was Waranga. When Waranga, who belonged to a sect of Christianity, grasped some meaning of what he'd been told, he said, perhaps Muhammad had been visited by a messenger of God, because this is what happened to Moses, who received the great law. Therefore, according to Waranga, Muhammad was to be considered the new prophet for his people. How was this spiritual experience validated? Pay attention here. This is interesting. His middle-aged wife gave him a 4-part test. She asked him if he saw a being in the room, and Muhammad answered in the affirmative. His wife then said, sit on my left thigh. Do you see the being now? Yes, he answered. Sit on my right thigh, she said. Do you see the being now? Yes, he answered. Then she said, sit on my lap. Do you see the figure now? Yes, Muhammad answered. At this point, Khadijah uncovered herself and said, do you see the being now? No, answered Muhammad. It has vanished. At this point, Khadijah said, this must be an angel, because he would not look on an uncovered female. On the strength of this extraordinary test, Muhammad's revelation was validated. It is astounding to believe that an entire worldwide religious movement was founded on this, and only this so-called evidence. This validation can be considered doubly remarkable because, according to Islam, the testimony of a woman is only half as valid as that of a man. Therefore, Islam is only validated by the testimony of a woman. Encouraged by his wife, Muhammad began to share his revelation with the inhabitants of Mecca in AD 610. He told them Allah alone was God and Muhammad was his prophet. he met with nothing but disbelief. In addition, the mystery surrounding his parentage led to humiliation at the hands of his peers. They asked him to perform miracles so they could believe in him. However, guess what? He was unable to perform the requested. They tried to kill him. Muhammad ran for his life toward the town of Yathrib, 270 miles from Mecca, which name he later changed to Medina. This journey has become known as the Hijra, the beginning of the Islamic calendar. When he arrived in Medina, his followers grew in number. They were joined by a band of mercenaries. Together they began to raid caravans to finance his operations. He took plunder and captives to be used as slaves for ransom. I'm sorry that this is probably not big enough for most of you to see. So that's why it's important that you write down that phone number and order your own brochure. Books have been written on the Islamic treatment of women. Suffice it to say, the roots of these attitudes begin in the conduct of Muhammad and his followers in Medina and Mecca. The consequences of Muhammad's revelation. The reign of terror by Muhammad's troops was not limited just to Mecca and Medina, but soon targeted all of the inhabitants of Arabia, including Jews and Christians. During one attack on a Jewish tribe, Banu Qurayza, Muhammad ordered all the teenage boys and men of the tribe killed, simply because Muhammad claimed that they broke a treaty between them. His men dug a ditch and they chopped off their heads of over 700 males. And threw their bodies into this ditch that they dug. His forces raped the women and then enslaved them along with their children. Can you think of anything more brutal? 700 men and boys just chopped their heads off because Muhammad ordered it. Okay, there's a word we need to try to understand called abrogation, which means annulment. The idea is simply that a newer revelation from Allah can cancel and replace an old one. The Quran itself claims that newer verses replace the older ones because the newer ones are better. And the source is Quran and Surah. For us, it would be like, okay, we go to court and we're supposed to be governed by a certain law, and so we get our attorney or somebody to change it because we think we've got a new one. That was what abrogation was, so to speak. We do not abrogate a verse or cause it to be forgotten, except that we bring forth one better than it or similar to it. Do you not know that Allah is over all things competent? As Muhammad changed doctrines to accommodate his desires, his very intelligent wife, Aisha, remarked, "Your Allah always rushes to fulfill your desires." Okay, go ahead. On page 14. Okay. And okay, abrogation came in very handy for Muhammad on numerous occasions. It seemed that whenever someone questioned his actions, he would hear from Allah, who consistently vindicated him. Here are just a few of the convenient revelations he received from Allah. Muhammad put himself on the same level as Allah in terms of obedience. There is not a single verse in the Quran that talks about obeying Allah without mentioning that obeying the Prophet Muhammad is also commanded. Muhammad lusted after his adopted son Zayd's wife. Amazingly, he received a revelation from Allah that allowed him to marry his daughter-in-law. That's found in Quran, Surah 33-37. But when Zayd had accomplished his want of her, we gave her to you as a wife, as that there should be no difficulty for the believers in respect of the wives of their adopted sons, when they have accomplished their want of them, and Allah's command shall be performed. Muhammad's thirst for unlimited sex and sexual slaves was also justified by revelation from Allah. Quran, Surah 33:50. O Prophet, surely we have made lawful to you your wives whom you have given their dowries, and those whom your right hand possesses out of those whom Allah has given to you as prisoners of war, and the daughters of your paternal uncles and the daughters of your paternal aunts. That's somewhat complicated, and this is why I encourage you to order your own book, because I can't go into every little detail here. Okay. Women were like any other possession taken in a battle. Muslims found them useful in many ways. One method was to use captured women for sexual pleasures, another for their reproductive capabilities, and a third to buy and sell women as slaves and concubines. Another thing, Muhammad ordered that the best fifth of all the spoils of war, including women, be reserved for him. Some were reserved for his personal use. Muhammad suspected the treasurer of conquered town, Khaybar, to be withholding information about the location of the town's treasure. I won't go into that anymore. Okay, now the next thing, think about this a minute. Jesus Christ gave his life as a sacrifice for many. Muhammad lived his life sacrificing many for his own appetite and selfish gains. Not much contrast there, is there? The next thing we need to understand is jihad. How many of you have heard the word jihad associated with Islam? Okay? It's a difficult term to really get into the depth of it. For simplicity, let's just say jihad is making war. Making war. They could still consider jihad today. Once Muhammad gained control of Mecca and his forces grew stronger, the Quranic verses about fighting changed yet again. Now Muslims were commanded not just to fight back when they were wronged or attacked. They were told to go on the offensive, to kill the infidels and bring Christians and Jews into obedience to Islam. What does that make you think of that has happened recently? How about Hamas? Hamas. October the 7th of last year, Hamas attacked Israel for no reason other than they're aggressive Muslims. They're terrorists. And now they have tried to turn it around and say it's Israel's fault because they retaliated. How much sense does that make? But that's the way they do it. They try to make people think that it's Israel's fault. Okay. They've been at this for years. The penalty for those who wage war against Allah and his apostle and try to bring violence to the earth, they will face being killed or crucified and having their hands and feet cut off from opposite sides, or they shall be banished from the land. That will be their disgrace in this world, and they'll suffer a great punishment in the next world. I think we're on the same page now. Yeah. Amazing. Okay. We talk a little bit about military expansion. By the way, that clock's 20 minutes off. If we go by that, we're going to get out of here late. Okay. Okay, this is some things to consider. The brutality of these people has no bounds. Consider these shocking statistics. Since the beginning of the Islamic conquest until now, those slain by Muslim forces are as follows. You might want to write this down. 51 million Christians. 51 million Christians have been slain. 80 million Hindus 80 million Hindus. We're talking about world aggression here, folks. 10 million Buddhists. 10 million Buddhists. 120 to 125 million African people. You think they're not serious? How could they do these statistics? Modern Muslims contend that the term jihad pertains only to the inner struggle of the human soul against temptation and spiritual evil. In so doing, they attempt to sugarcoat the clear record of history. When leaders of radical Islam groups such as Al-Qaeda shout to the followers, "Jihad, jihad, jihad," they are hardly exhorting their troops to wage a battle for the soul. There's a veritable cascade of Quranic scripture underscoring the command to Muslims to fight and kill. Consider these selected verses taken directly from the Quran itself, Islam's holiest book. Allah prefers Muslims to carry out jihad to those who don't. In other words, not all Muslims are indoctrinated enough to carry out jihad. Fortunately, because we've got them living right amongst us, folks. If they all believe that way, who knows what could happen. Muslims who flee from jihad will go to hell. That's taken from the Quran. True Muslims are those who carry out jihad. True Muslims are the ones that carry out jihad. Allah grants forgiveness to those who carry out jihad. Allah commands His followers to carry out jihad by beheading people. You remember a few years ago when that was, I think it was on the news. I don't remember exactly where it was done, but they actually showed, some guys that were beheading people. Allah grants forgiveness to those who carry out jihad. So if you want to be forgiven by Allah, I guess you go out and kill an infidel. I think that's what this says. Allah commands His followers to carry out jihad by beheading people. Sorry, I covered that already. To them, there is salvation through jihad. It's that you believe in Allah and His apostle, and that you carry out jihad on Allah's behalf with your money and your lives. That's what's best for you. If you only knew it, He will forgive your sins and bring you into paradise, which contains rivers and pleasant dwellings in the gardens of Eden. That is the great victory. Basically, rewarding for committing jihad, or in other terms, killing infidels. We're infidels, right? Allah grants forgiveness and mercy to those who die in jihad. The Quran commands people to love fighting. Fighting non-Muslims leads to prosperity. Keep fighting until Islam is the only religion. If you do a little research, you'll find out that Islam is the fastest growing religion in the world. They control more people than any other religion in the world, and probably in the history of the world. This is serious. They are serious. Very, very good. Yes. They're living amongst us. We had one president that brought in a bunch of Muslims in I believe it was in the state of Minnesota, and they now have a representative on our government that is a Muslim, and they're vowed to kill infidels, or us, and yet we have one in our own government. The jihad standard of fighting is to terrify your enemies. Allah commands His followers to fight Jews and Christians. Allah is supposedly their God. Fight people until they convert to Islam. Some famous people have converted to Islam over the years, and they always change their name to Muhammad. Like Cassius Clay changed his name to Muhammad Ali when he was converted. And if you don't know who Cassius Clay was, he was one of the most famous boxers in the world. He was a world champion. Muslims are told to cut off the necks and fingers of those who opposed Allah and Muhammad, and that's taken from the Quran, verse, or equivalent to verse 8. Oh, I don't have much time left. Either as a result of political correctness or naivety, many refuse to link Islamic terrorism with the Islamist ideology that inspires it. Yet the opposite is true. As just one example, listen to the words of the current Islamic spiritual leader, Ajern Quadri, I'm sorry, I didn't probably pronounce that, of the United Kingdom. Now this is the current leader, spiritual leader of Islam. You can't say that Islam is a religion of peace, because Islam does not mean peace. Islam means submission. I'll repeat that. Islam means submission. So the Islam is one who submits. So the Muslim is one who submits. There is a place for violence in Islam. There is a place for jihad in Islam. Now, this is a statement that their current spiritual leader has made recently. Today in our world, the Muslim Brotherhood and other Islamic groups are harassing, torturing, and murdering non-Muslims across the globe. One of the most distressing issues of our time is the systematic emptying of Christians from the Middle East through relentless Islam-led persecution. Yep, 2 minutes now. Example, Hamas, who was recently attacked Israel on October the 7th. In addition, current Muslim world leaders regularly call for the destruction of Israel and the annihilation of the Jewish people. Needless to say, Muslims do not like Christians or infidels. They get rewarded if they kill a Christian. Only those, now this is from a Muslim saying this, only those who become proficient in the art of death can prevail. So prepare yourself to do a great deed. Be keen on dying, and life will be granted to you. So work towards a noble death. I think this will be my final statement for today. The Muslim people are not the enemy. They are victims of the ideology of Islam. Worth repeating. Muslim people are not the enemy. They are the victims of the ideology of Islam. Muslims are trapped in a world of spiritual darkness, one that's full of suffering, fear, and hatred. They're told to believe that the path of jihad is sacred and holy, and following it is a guarantee of paradise and eternal life. Any questions? Comments?
This has not always been a one-way street. Crusaders, Christian crusaders, went over there, tried to force them into Christianity. You know, and
That's off of my subject.
I know, but that's right.
Say again? Yeah. Okay, I'm sorry. That's a whole different subject that I'm not familiar with. But, okay. How many are going to order this little book now? The phone number is 800-700-7000. And it's the Christian Broadcasting Network puts these out. Thank you for your attention. Hope I didn't bore you to death.